Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Terre, Haute. This congregation welcomes all people, regardless of their age, religion, race, nationality, ability, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or anything else that has been used to divide people. We are a group of people with our own opinions, our own ideas, our own dreams. But we share ideals. We share a common belief in a liberal religion. In our discussions, we may disagree with each other, but we must always remember that what unites us is stronger than what separates us. We must always end the service aware of the love that we have for each other. On being you, the third principle, we affirm and promote acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations.
From the east comes the sun, bringing a new and unspoiled day.
It has already circled the earth and looked upon distant lands and faraway peoples.
It has passed over the mountain ranges and the waters of the seven seas.
It has shone upon laborers in the fields, into the windows of homes and shops and factories.
It has beheld proud cities with gleaming towers.
And also the hovels of the poor.
It has been witness to both good and evil, the works of honest men and women, and the conspiracy of knaves.
It has seen marching armies, bomb-blasted villages, and the destruction that wasteth at noonday.
Now, unsullied from the tireless journey, it comes to us, messenger of the morning,
harbinger of a new day.
Opening hymn number 126. Transitional words for today are number 658, in the back of your hymnal. To laugh is to risk appearing the fool.
To weep is to risk appearing sentimental.
To reach out for another is to risk exposing our true self.
To place our ideas, our dreams before the crowd is to risk loss.
To love is to risk not being loved in return.
To hope is to risk despair.
To try is to risk failure.
To live is to risk dying.
And with this, I would like to introduce Reverend Bill Breeden.
I want to talk about Tulsa today. Biden went to Tulsa this week. The only thing I knew about Tulsa as a child, the only thing I ever heard about Tulsa, Oklahoma as a child was Oral Roberts. I used to watch him on television. Anybody ever watch Oral Roberts on television? You remember who Oral Roberts was? He was a rather fraudulent faith healer that claimed to be able to heal people. I happen to know personally a family who took their child to see him at his rally, or his whatever they called it in those days, in Indianapolis, Indiana. And she was born with cerebral palsy. And they went to see Oral Roberts because they thought he could heal her. And they met with them backstage, and they told the family, if you have $1,000, Oral Roberts will see you. That was in 1966. And they knew that the Ritchie family did not look like they had $1,000, and they also knew that Oral couldn't heal her. There was an old joke in those days about my dad bought an Oral Roberts album, but we couldn't play it because the hole kept healing up all the time. And so, anyway, that's Tulsa. That's all I knew about Tulsa for many years. I happened to be driving truck for RCA back during when the Murrah building was bombed in Tulsa, and was coming around Tulsa that morning when the bomb went off, coming back from El Paso. Biden's visit to Tulsa. Biden said, just because history is silent, it does not mean that it did not take place. Hell was unleashed, literal hell was unleashed, and now, he said, the nation becomes to come to grips with the subsequent sin of denial. We can't choose. We can't just choose what we want to know and not what we should know, said Biden. I come here to help fill the silence because in silence wounds deepen. You may remember that not too long ago, Mr. Trump held a rally in Tulsa was scheduled to be on the day of June 10th, the celebration of the end of slavery. It was one of the least attended rallies he ever had. In 1921, on May 31st and June 1st, a white mob, including some people hastily deputized as authorities, looted, burned, and destroyed Tulsa's Greenwood district, a very upscale district and black community in Tulsa, which was referred to as Black Wall Street. As many as 300 black Tulsans were killed, and thousands of survivors were forced to for a time enter an internment camp overseen by the National Guard. When the National Guard was sent in response to the violence, they did not stop the violence against the blacks, they arrested the blacks. Burned bricks and a fragment of a church basement are all that survive today of more than 30 blocks of historically black district in Tulsa. Historians say that the massacre in Tulsa began after a local newspaper drummed up a furor over a black man accused of stepping on a white girl's foot. When black Tulsans showed up, by the way, there was never any proof of that, but when black Tulsans showed up with guns to prevent the man's lynching, white residents responded with overwhelming force. On Tuesday, the president, joined by top black advisors, met privately with 3 surviving members of the Greenwood community who lived through the violence. Viola Mother Fletcher, Hughes Uncle Red Van Ellis, and Leslie Mandel Mother Randall were three survivors of that massacre. 101, 106, and 107 years old. I think I have a picture of her, if you want to show that now. It may not be in the order. Yeah, there she is. That is Viola Mother Fletcher. And I will tell you some of her testimony in a few minutes. Breeden said that their experience had been a story seen in a mirror dimly. But no longer, he said, now your story will be known in full view. Outside, Latasha Sanders, 33 of Tulsa, brought her 5 children and nephews in hope of spotting Biden. She said, it's been almost 100 years, and this is the first time we've heard from any U.S. president. I brought my kids here today just so they could be a part of history and not just hear about it, and so they can teach generations to come. John Ondiek, another Tulsan in the crowd following Biden's speech, said he was encouraged that there aren't just black people here. That tells me there's an awakening going on in this country. There is a crack where the light comes in. This country has seen a crack in the past few years. We've seen a crack in the mythology of American exceptionism. We've seen who we really are. We are about to see more of it. The survivors testified at a recent congressional hearing. Viola Fletcher, 171 years old, said, I'm here seeking justice. I am here, what? She's not 107 years old. Yes, she's not 171. Thank you for laughing. It's a wonder she's not 171 by the time she got to testify in Congress. I'm here seeking justice, she said. I'm here asking my country to acknowledge what happened in Tulsa in 1921. She recalled how the Greenwood neighborhood of Tulsa had been once a thriving and affluent African American community where she could have lived her own American dream. But this bright future was taken away. She said, the night of the massacre, I was wakened by my family. My parents and 5 siblings were there. I was told we had to leave, and that was it. I will never forget the violence of the white mob when we left our home. I still see black men being shot, black bodies lying in the street. I still smell smoke and see fire. I still see black businesses being burned. I still hear airplanes flying overhead. I hear the screams. I've lived through the massacre every day. 107 years old. Viola's brother, Hughes Van Ellis, testified, my sister Viola told me, she said it was thought that guns were going off. Dad looked outside to see people getting gunshot, houses getting burned. So there's only 6 little kids. I was a baby. My father just managed to barely get us out with the clothes on our backs, and we didn't have time to get nothing else together. They escaped with their lives, but Van Ellis says life was tough for him and his siblings after losing everything. He said they had to pick cotton to survive, even mentioning he didn't receive his high school diploma until he was in his 20s after being drafted into a segregated military. Mr. Van Ellis was a World War II veteran, and he told all lawmakers in Congress, in the century since the massacre and destruction of Greenwood, the survivors have been denied any compensation. A federal lawsuit was dismissed as being too late. We were made to feel that our struggles were unworthy of justice, Mr. Ellis said, that we were less valued than whites, that we weren't fully American. We were shown that in the United States, not all men were created equal. We were shown that when black voices called out for justice, no one cared. Leslie Benefield Randall, 106 years old, still remembered a house engulfed in flames and bodies stacked in truck beds. Horrors that 100 years later led to a pledge by President Joe Biden to work for racial justice. Randall said, I was quite a little kid, but I remember running and the soldiers were coming in. Now I want to show you another poster This is from the Center that follows political posters, and it's in California. They have over 9,000, I think, or something like that, posters. And I'll give you the translation or the reading in that in a minute. This was the 100th anniversary of that Tulsa community massacre. Some of the deaths in Tulsa were the result of private planes bombing the community. Private individuals taking their planes and bombing the town. This is considered to be the first time that planes were ever used to bomb civilians. I have a picture of Guernica in my living room that I've had for many years, and I've always thought that was the first time of the bombing of civilians, but that was the first time a nation bombed civilians. This was private citizens in Tulsa dropping bombs on their fellow citizens. But it wasn't the last time that African American civilians were bombed. On May 13th, 1985, a police helicopter dropped a bomb on a row house in Philadelphia, targeting a black liberation group called MOVE. The group advocated communal living, and its members frequently engaged in public demonstrations against racism, police brutality, and other issues. The resulting fire killed 11 MOVE members, including 5 children. The fire burst out of control and destroyed 65 houses in the neighborhood, prompting a widespread outrage. This bombing was a qualitative escalation in the use of the military force against the civilian population by a police agency in the United States. In 1996, 11 years later, a jury in Philadelphia ordered the city of Philadelphia and 2 former city officials to pay $1.5 million to a survivor and relatives of 2 MOVE members who died in that fire. The jury found that the city, the police commissioner, and former fire commissioner used excessive force and violated the MOVE members' constitutional protections against unreasonable search and seizure in that bombing. The descendants of the Tulsa massacres should receive reparations. It will not be an easy fight, as some people continue to be outraged by the telling of the history. We have school districts all over the country now, and legislators all over the country trying to stop the teaching about the history of the blacks in the United States. And in fact, our own legislature here in Indiana has just awarded large amounts of money to private virtual schools, most of them sponsored by religious organizations. They will not teach Tulsa. They will not teach Philadelphia. I didn't learn of these things till much later in my life. No one told me about this in school. We need to teach our children who we have been and who we want to be. I learned about Philadelphia and Tulsa and many other examples of who we have been when I first read Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States after meeting Howard in 1980. I'm honored to be included in that history in the later editions. And I miss him. He became a friend of mine for many years, and I think he was a wonderful historian. And I also would encourage you to read not only that book, People's History of the United States, but I'd also encourage you to take a look at a book called The Open Veins of South America. It's by Eduardo Giuliano, a great poet and a great writer, a great historian. And if you really want to get an idea of who we have been from other people's eyes, not the eyes of those who are trying to get elected, not the eyes of those who own the country in a sense, not the eyes of those who want to give you a picture of American exceptionalism, but rather the eyes of those who have seen us as we are. Take a look at histories written by other people. This poster, the text reads as such. It has El Salvador on there because they wanted to make a link between Philadelphia bombing and El Salvador. This poster was made in 1985. It was made by Seth Tabachman and Charles Fredmick. It's an offset done in 1985. The text written in those streets of Philadelphia reads such: Philadelphia, quotation marks, El Salvador. My mama couldn't sleep last night. She just rocked back and forth in her chair, looking out the window. My mama, she couldn't sleep last night. I saw the tears running down her face, and I asked her why. Because they're bombing the people, baby. Because they're bombing the people. Oh, baby, we've got to do something. They're bombing the people now, baby. They're bombing the people. You don't bomb the people. American money, American munitions are still being used to bomb the people. They're being used in Syria by one of our states that we send missiles to, Saudi Arabia and others. They're being used in Gaza, American munitions being dropped in Gaza and fired in Gaza. They're still being used for the destruction of the poor, the destruction of people of color. American arms sales to autocrats in the billions and billions and billions of dollars expose a crack which I hope lets the light in. Ralph Waldo Emerson, I've said that Leonard Cohen got that his song, There's a Crack in Everything, that's how the light gets in, one of my favorite songs of all time. I thought he borrowed that whole phrase from Emerson because I thought I remembered reading that in Emerson's journal. I've come to find out that only half of it is in Emerson's journal, and that is, there is a crack in everything. Emerson said, there is a crack in everything that God made except reason. Except reason. Emerson, as you know, was a rationalist and transcendentalist and dependent on reason. I'd learned today that in 1862, the co-founder of the Atlantic magazine, co-founder Ralph Waldo Emerson, deplored decades of past compromise with forces supporting and benefiting from the immoral destitution of slavery, and derided lawmakers who would continue down that path. The evil you contend, he said, the evil you contend with has taken alarming proportions, and you still content yourself with parrying the blows it aims, but as if enchanted, abstain from striking at the cause, parrying with the blows that it aims. You contend yourself with dealing with just the results and not the cause. At that fragile moment in American history, the nation's first Republican president and Republican majority Congress faced an open confrontation with long-simmering racial injustices and undemocratic traditions. Emerson implored them to meet the moment head-on and use their constitutional authority to end the institutionalization of these inequities for good. We need to remember the move, people, in Philadelphia. The black liberation movement in the United States didn't just come out of the sky, drop out of the sky. James Cone's book, Black Liberation, was published while I was in seminary. I remember in Nazarene Seminary, some of us were reading that, much to the chagrin of some of our professors, but not all of them. But James Cone had been reading the Latin American theologians who started the liberation movement in south of the border. Ernesto Cardenal was a liberation poet, priest in Nicaragua. He said, "I've had the vocation of poet since I was born. The religious involvement came later in life." Cardenal told Mexican newspaper in an interview in 2003, "To that poet vocation, I added the revolutionary vocation. Surrender to God led me to surrender to the people." Cardinal died last year. He was sanctioned in 1983 by Pope John Paul II as he prayed for forgiveness on his knees, and asking the Pope's blessing. Pope John Paul II sanctioned him for political activity. Pope Francis lifted that sanction in 2019. I would ask you to consider the life of Bishop Oscar Romero, who was appointed Archbishop of El Salvador during the Carter administration. And by the way, I happen to believe Jimmy Carter is one of the greatest presidents we've ever had, and certainly the greatest past president we've ever had. A wonderful human being. I had strong disagreements with some of his policies. And he does too now, looking back on them. When Oscar Romero was appointed Bishop of El Salvador, Archbishop of El Salvador, they were building a great sanctuary in El Salvador, spending millions of dollars of pesos to build a sanctuary. The roof was not on it. The Pope chose Oscar Romero, a conservative bishop, to be archbishop. He came to the place of archbishop in El Salvador, and he looked at the war going on, and he looked at the poor, and he said, there will be no roof on this sanctuary until the poor are fed. He refused to build the sanctuary. On Good Friday, I don't remember the exact date, but on a Good Friday, he preached in his Good Friday sermon, ordering his brothers and sisters in the Salvadoran military to lay down their weapons and quit killing their brothers and sisters. He left the sanctuary after that homily and was killed by an American-made M16 by soldiers trained at Fort Benning, Georgia in the School of Americas. We have been training the forces basically of evil and pointing the guns at people of color for centuries. There is a light. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. I think Cohen got that last line from another author. I can't remember his name. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And in his wonderful song anthem, he says, ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. I invite you to look at America and understand that right now, in this time, the young people of America are awake. They're woke. Old people are getting woke. There seems to be a crack in this great cathedral of American exceptionalism that is a myth. We are just as vulnerable to the virus of nationalism, ultranationalism, and fascism as any other country in the world. And it is time that we look to the light. It is time that we begin to speak. It is time that we begin to act. And I encourage all of you to write our legislators. Write Bob Heaton. He's our legislator in the 46th. I ran against him a few years ago. Nice guy. He needs to understand there are people out here who do not believe that we should cut out public education in favor of private education, limited education. He needs to understand that there is a crack there, there's light coming in, and we see it, and we will not close it again. All of our politicians need to understand that, and we as human beings need to understand it and do something about it. I was fortunate in my life to meet people who showed me the cracks where the light came in. One of them was Miguel de Soto, a former minister of culture for Nicaragua, when I went down in 1989 and got to spend a few hours with him and ask him why he ended up working with the poor in the revolution in Nicaragua. And he told me, and I may have shared this with you before, but I'll share it again. When he was 6 years old, de Soto is a Spanish name. In Nicaragua, the Spanish were the wealthy of the country, not the native people. He was of Spanish descent. His family were very, very wealthy. He rode to Mass in a limousine at the age of 5 with his grandmother. And on the outskirts of El Salvador, back to their palatial home, he saw children digging in the dump, the city dump. And he asked his grandmother, why are those children doing that? Why are they out there in that dump? And his grandmother says, because we have yet to learn what it is to be a Christian. I would translate that a little bit differently. I would say it's because we have failed yet to learn what it is to be a human being. Because a human being, being human beings, caring for all of us. It means reaching out to all of us. It means preserving our lives and our liberty and giving the grandchildren to come for many generations a world worth living in. Leonard Cohen's verse, we asked for signs and the signs were sent. The bird betrayed, the married spent. The widowhood of every single government, signs for all to see. I can run no more with that lawless crowd while the killers in high places say their prayers out loud. But now they've summoned up a thundercloud and they're going to hear from me. I hope that each of us sees the thundercloud. I hope that each of us sees the crack and see the light and begin to speak. Blessed be. Our closing hymn, thank you. Our closing hymn is number 108, My Life Flows On in Endless Song.
My life flows on in endless song above earth's lamentation. I hear the real, the far of him that hails a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear the music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? What though the tempest round me roars? I know the truth it liveth. What though the darkness around me close? Songs in the night it giveth. No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging. Since love prevails in heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing? When tyrants tremble as they hear the bells of freedom ringing, when friends rejoice both far and near, how can I keep from singing? To prison cell and dungeon vile, our thoughts to them are winging. When friends by shame are undefiled, how can I keep from singing?
Our closing words.
May the light around us guide our footsteps and hold us fast to the best and most righteous that we seek. May the darkness around us nurture our dreams and give us rest so that we may give ourselves to the work of our world. Let us seek to remember the wholeness of our lives, the weaving of light and shadow in this great and astonishing dance in which we move.
May the blessing